Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the regular meeting of Council to order. Our clerk today will be Ms. Sheila Gurry. I'd ask for a procedural motion to proceed in camera. Moved by Councillor Martman, seconded by Councillor Hemmons. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to the October 19th regular meeting of Council. I'd like to first recognize that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk tonight will be Ms. Sheila Goury. And with the continuing COVID, I remind all of you that the regular meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter, Council Procedure Bylaw number 2018, number 7272, and Ministerial Order number M192 governing open meetings during a state of emergency, and the Provincial Health Officer Order regarding mass gathering events. Therefore, members of the public are required to observe meetings virtually and not attend in person, and question period will be suspended throughout the duration of the provincial health orders that are in effect. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items, Ms. Goury, and we have several.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. First, for agenda item 12A, we're replacing pages 90 to 94 for the report titled Bylaw and Policy Renewal Project Timeline. And we're also adding a PowerPoint presentation from Karen Robertson, Deputy City Clerk, titled Bylaw and Policy Renewal Project Timeline. Second, for agenda item 12E, we're adding delegations Kenneth Brault and Irene Wengatz for development permit application DP 1138 600 9th Street. Third, we're adding agenda item 12I, checkout bag regulation bylaw. As well, we're adding agenda item 14C, Councillor Armstrong, notice of motion re city facility room bookings for nonprofit addiction support groups. And finally, agenda item 15A, correspondence dated 2020, October 14th, regarding Vancouver Island and Coastal Community Climate Leadership Plan Resilience Summit to be held November 6, 2020.
Thank you very much. I'd ask for a motion for approval of the agenda as amended. Moved Councillor Armstrong, seconded Councillor Martman. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. A motion for adoption of the minutes is circulated. Moved Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favour? Motion carries. Thank you very much. On to the Mayor's report. I have a few items to speak about tonight. For those of you who were out at the mall on the weekend or any of our malls, further pop-up booths in support of Reimagine Nanaimo. One at Woodgrove Centre occurred on Saturday, another at Country Club Centre on Sunday. We have another coming up on Saturday, October 24th at noon to 4 at Nanaimo North Town Centre near the London Drugs entrance. And again on Sunday, October 25th, 2020, noon to 4 at the University Village Shopping Centre, and that will be outside. I encourage all citizens, and there are no excuses, if you have time and interest and you care about what your city is going to look like in the future, please attend, go to one of the pop-up booths, make your submissions through the various methods that have already been outlined or are fully available on the city website. This is not the time to be slack. I know that some have expressed concerns that in the midst of COVID, how could they possibly make a meaningful contribution because you don't know what the city is going to look like. And I guess I just have to say, I think the people who are working for the city and are participating are more than able to consider various scenarios, but the long-term health of our city is dependent on your participation. We're also going to be offering rebates with respect to oil replacement of oil and other fossil fuel heating systems, and that's a new double the rebate program in place. The City of Nanaimo is working with Clean BC Better Homes program to encourage homeowners to switch their home's primary heating source from fossil fuel heating to an electric air source heat pump. For qualifying heat pump upgrades, the rebates can be substantial, up to $6,000. So now is the time, if you have the opportunity, and it's timely, to make your contribution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and getting assistance to do it. Obviously, COVID continues to present real challenges for our city recreational facilities, and I want to pay particular tribute tonight to Mr. Harding, the General Manager of Parks, Culture and Recreation, and his staff, some of whom have faced a certain amount of public outrage from time to time over the last few weeks as they have struggled, as has everyone, including the parents and the young people involved and people who are active and want to participate in various sports activities, recreational activities. Everybody's suffering. We all get it. We're in the middle of a pandemic. And so it's really, really important that everybody exercise the kind of restraint on their behavior and frustration, and please try not to take it out on city staff. Because if you think you're frustrated, they're really frustrated, because the rules do change from time to time, sometimes on a daily basis. For that to be implemented by our staff across the range of recreational facilities is not an easy undertaking. So please try and exercise a little patience. We're not living in the end of the world, and if something doesn't start on time, or you can't see a child perform or play in some event, it is frustrating. I get that. I'm a parent and grandparent, but be respectful of the fact that city staff are doing the best they possibly can. Which leads me to talk about something else that some citizens have raised with me. I think most of us passed a Thanksgiving that was unlike most Thanksgivings any of us have ever faced, which is not something we are used to. It is a time for family and friends to gather, to celebrate, to eat, to break bread, to share wine, to enjoy the company of one another, to give thanks, a very traditional approach to all the good things that come in any given year. That was not the case this year. Many of us celebrated our Thanksgiving without family present. If we were lucky enough to have a spouse or a partner, that was probably as big a crowd as we saw. And we are coming up to Halloween, which is one of the more fun evenings of the year for many people. I don't think there's anything more charming than having the little beaners come to your door in their various costumes, proud of themselves and asking for trick or treat, as the case may be. But it's not going to be a Halloween like last year either. I ask all of you as citizens to please respect what Dr. Henry advises us to do as we approach this Halloween. I know it's going to be problematic and difficult. I suspect a lot of folks, if they put out goodies, they're going to be sitting at a table at the end of someone's driveway. If you see people who are being disrespectful of that kindness, I hope you'll tell them to smarten up. I appreciate it's trick or treat, but if there's ever a time to just be kind about receiving treats, respect also the fact that in this time there are many people with various illnesses. None of us know who the state of the health of the person whose door we may be knocking on, or the reason they've turned out their light. They may be a shift worker who's working in healthcare. They may be somebody whose health is extremely compromised, and you need to respect that. Because if we're really good and we obey the rules and we follow the directions, just maybe, we'll have something resembling as close to a real Christmas as is possible, where perhaps we can gather in slightly larger numbers, where we can actually celebrate what is one of the most important days of the year for most people, regardless of religious faith, because it is an expected time in Canadian tradition for families and loved ones, and what I used to refer to as the strays, the people who have no place to go, who get invited to their neighbors' houses, and we celebrate together. It is one of the most special days of the year. But it will not be like any other Christmas this year, and it will be even less like any other Christmas if we don't take care to respect the rules, to socially and physically distance ourselves for the time being, to wash our hands and take all those steps that are important, respecting the health of all those we love in our own homes, but respecting the health of all those who are strangers to us. We may be the carriers, we don't know. And so I want to wish all of the good people of Nanaimo a happy Halloween, as happy as it can possibly be. But again, please respect the fact that it's not going to be like other years, and we need to behave accordingly. Thank you very much, Ms. Gurry. The next would be rise and report, and we're certainly not in a position to do that tonight. And the next is a very happy event. I am delighted to welcome Mr. Harding, the General Manager of Parks, Recreation and Culture, who's going to introduce a delegation.
Thank you, Worship. Delegation also do a little bit of presentation. So this is our fourth of our virtual openings with Council. So as Worship was mentioning, we can't get out and do some of the in-person types of aspects. So this is one of the opening of the Centennial, what we call it officially the Rotary Centennial Garden at Maffeo Sutton Park. And I got a few slides to go through, and then Mr. Hammond's going to come up and speak for a little bit. But again, this park is commemorating 100 years of Rotarian contribution to the community. And I've been having the pleasure of being in my position, seeing a number of the projects Rotarians have done over the years, and if you go through, it's quite amazing throughout the community of how, particularly in Parks, Recreation, Culture, but in many other aspects, how the Rotarians have contributed to our city. Started way back with Bowen Park, because we have some old pictures of some shovels and people digging out as that land was starting to be developed into a park. And up until this park now, which is opening, and I'll go through some slides. But this is, we're really pleased with the COVID year to actually get this done. It was a nip and tuck there for a bit, but to celebrate the 100 years, we're very pleased that this is done. This is the Centennial Garden at Mathail Sutton. And I won't go through too much of it. I think the pictures can kind of speak for themselves, but a great addition to Mathail Sutton Park, particularly in a location of the park that was been underutilized, and with this facility, see a much more use of this area and just an incredible addition to it. These are two of the landscape architects. As we go through those who particularly like plants and native plants, there's lots of different vegetation and signage that commemorates the kind of coastal plantings that are included in this area, as well as some of the lighting that we'll see at nighttime. It's a place that you can utilize during the day and the evening. Now we have some shots of some active park users in our virtual. We just happened to find these people walking into the park as we were taking these pictures, so luckily we had some. As you'll see, just some great park advocates in the area. Here's our last of the slides. So again, lots of Rotarians in behind this council, of course, supporting this project. And if there's any questions, I'll maybe afterwards, before the worship officially opens the park, but I'll turn this over to Mr. Hammond now, who can give a little bit more background. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harding. Mr. Hammond, not your first time at the mic in front of council. You're welcome.
Do my duty.
You paid overtime?
No. Good. Just more things I can put in my resume.
Mayor Krogh, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dave Hammond. I'm here this evening representing the Rotary Club of Nanaimo, and in fact the other 4 Rotary clubs in Nanaimo and Lantzville. And I'm here to thank you for your support for this wonderful project. We are, as Mr. Harding said, celebrating 100 years of Rotary in Nanaimo. And we, again, as he said, one of the first projects was Bowen Park a long time ago. And so we wanted to create something special to recognize our 100th anniversary. And I think this is special. We're really pleased the way that it turned out. And when you look at the design work, we tried to make it part of the park and part of the sea and part of the seashore. The pergola there, that's supposed to be the waves in the harbor. And I think it turned out just wonderfully well. I want to say a special word of thanks to 3 people. First of all, to Richard Harding for his guidance through this whole process. It was a long and winding road, but the results were worth it. Second one is to Scott Newlands in the Park Department, who actually made it happen. And the third one, and he'll be surprised about this, but is Councillor Ian Thorpe, because he helped us through not 1 council, but 2 councils. And nobody else here can say that. Well, maybe Councillor Armstrong a little bit. So we're delighted with the result, and we anticipate that when COVID protocols allow, we're planning a public opening and to welcome the public in a celebration, and we look forward to that day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hammond. Much appreciated. Mr. Harding, you want to say something?
No, it's over to you now. If there's any questions, we can answer about that.
Then, if I may, let me, on behalf of council and the good citizens of Nanaimo, say thank you for a very sweet 100 years of contribution to this community. The good work of Rotarians is seen all over this town, and this is just one further wonderful example of what happens when people get together and collectively pool their efforts, their money, their resources, and their interest, and work in conjunction with others to create something that is quite wonderful. I think those of us who had the opportunity to attend either during the opening ceremony or such as it was, I don't mean that unkindly, a fairly informal affair during the day, but even more especially at night, seeing the incredible beauty of this new contribution. It is a very attractive facility, and it reminds us, as the plaque indicates and as the council report tonight indicates, that what Rotary stands for in a troubled world, whether we're talking about peace or all other good things. So on behalf of the City of Nanaimo, and in keeping with the modern world where it's all virtual, I am going to officially declare the Rotary Centennial Garden open. Yay. Thank you. On to the mundane now. Committee minutes. These minutes to be received. We're not requiring any motion. A motion for adoption of consent items, but I'm going to suggest in the circumstances that...
I want a removal.
Sorry?
I'd like to remove.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, I would like to-
supposing where I'm going with this.
Okay, yeah, no, I would like to remove item 10A1 and make an amendment to the motions when it's my turn to speak to them.
So, Your
Ms.
Worship,
Gurry.
I think the only item left under consent items to deal with is B, and then items A and C will be dealt with separately. So if
And
there's a
C will be dealt with, sorry, C will be dealt with separately.
A and C will be, yeah. So you just need a motion to adopt consent item B right now.
So moved.
So moved, seconded Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor, motion carries. Thank you very much. With respect, doing it in order, with respect to item A, I would think in the circumstances, given that there was no report to the committee, I'll turn it over to Councillor Armstrong.
That's actually, Your Worship, my mistake as the chair. What I should have said to the motion was to have a staff report completed to address the motion, and that's the motion I would like to make today. That a staff report be completed addressing the motion.
Appropriate wording, Ms. Gurry, and suitable for purposes?
Yes,
For 1 and 2, yes,
yes,
both motions.
thank you. I was just going to seek that clarification. That would be perfect. Thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you. Is there a seconder? Second. Councillor Thorpe, Councillor Martman, close third. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you very much, and I want to thank your committee, by the way, Councillor Armstrong, for all the good work it's doing. I hear wonderful reports about it.
Oh, thank you. You're a great group.
The remaining item is the Health and Housing Task Force meeting, Emergency Food and Nutrition Security Strategy, and we do have a delegation. Again, someone not unknown to the council chambers, Jen Cody, Executive Director of the Nanaimo Food Share. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mayor Krog. And thank you, City Council and staff and attending community members for the opportunity to present today. I want to acknowledge that I'm presenting on this Nanaimo territory and grateful for living, working, and learning as an uninvited guest on this territory. Tonight I'm presenting in support of the important work coming from the Emergency Food Working Group of the Health and Housing Committee. I want to express my thanks to City Council and staff, including Lisa Bhopal Singh and Karen Cronstall, and the diverse team of community organizations in creating the working group to address food and nutrition security that COVID elevated as an important issue of concern. Out of that work comes a recommendation to support establishing a food policy council, which I fully support. So what is a food policy council? And a food policy council is a collaboration between community organizations, local government, and community members who work together to facilitate networking and information sharing, coordinate the community response to food and nutrition security, identify community food priorities, act as a food and nutrition security advisory for local government and others, and support official community plans and other strategies as needed. Areas of coordination and action can include healthy food access, climate change mitigation and adaptation, local food economic development, reconciliation, food waste reduction, and other food and nutrition security issues. Most communities become involved with food policy councils through healthy food access. Hunger and emergency food are long-standing issues for any community, and Nanaimo is no exception to that. So why a food policy council? It creates opportunities for coordinated and strategic food security planning and action among stakeholders, which will improve efficiency, maximize existing resources, and reduce redundancy among community organizations. One benefit of the working group was in bringing together the stakeholders, community organizations, funders, the city, and community members to share information, identify priorities, and work together to address barriers for community members to access food. With the influx of funding to address community needs that are COVID-related, many organizations that have not included food and nutrition security as a part of their services are now doing so. It's been critical to the community response that we coordinate so that we're not duplicating efforts, and folks that are new to food security are supported in being able to respond without recreating the wheel and benefiting from others' experience in networks and some of the broader networks so that we can be efficient in addressing the needs in the community. A food policy council will improve Nanaimo's community response to food and nutrition security. When COVID hit, it was the network of food policy councils that identified food security as a gap in emergency planning policies and are bringing forward that gap to different levels of government. Outside of COVID, the working group identified the community being able to respond in other emergencies and also identified that the recommendations from the World Health Organization for a city's ability to respond during emergency includes an existing network of organizations which supports pre-planning and an ability to coordinate prior to any emergency. And that's something that a food policy council would be able to support being in place. Food policy councils support city policy. So they help fulfill the City of Nanaimo's food security goals and policies outlined in the City of Nanaimo's official community plan, including the need to protect farmland and increasing food growing opportunities, local food infrastructure, more and better access to fresh, healthy food and community food assets, and the potential to expand the value of the local food economy. And a number of other policies that are also part of the documentation of the community support for food security policies as well. The relationship of the Nanaimo Food Policy Council with the City of Nanaimo would be that the Food Policy Council is its own entity and would not be a committee of council. The Food Policy Council provides input to municipal, regional governments and staff about issues of food issues. And the Food Policy Council considers any matters which might be referred to the Policy Council by councils or staff. And the Food Policy Council can take positions on policy initiatives from other levels of government within the mandate of the Policy Council. Food policy councils are funded through diverse sources of funding. Nanaimo Food Share is willing to dedicate $5,000 a year towards staff time to contribute to the coordination of the Food Policy Council. And Nanaimo Food Share is willing to work with other community partners and the city to obtain additional funding to fully support it. In conclusion, our proposal is in partnership with Nanaimo Food Share and the local community organizations. The City of Nanaimo established a Nanaimo Food Policy Council to lead the work on the sustainable food system in a multi-stakeholder manner. And I defer to the wonderful wording in the minutes or in the notes for the council meeting today, which I think put that motion much better than I can. Council directed City of Nanaimo staff to identify sources of funding to support the Nanaimo Food Policy Council in being established, and Council commit to one City Council representative and one City of Nanaimo staff representative to participate in the Food Policy Council meetings once it's been established.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cody.
You bet, and thank you.
Some questions? For staff only. Anybody questions for Ms. Cody? Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's not a question. I just wanted to thank Ms. Cody for the time that she put forward and all the other people who've put forward on the working group that brought this work to the council here. So thanks very much for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donner.
Councillor Armstrong, is it for staff or Ms. Cody?
Staff.
Well, let's go through Ms. Cody first, and then staff can respond. Councillor Gesselbrock?
Thank you, Worship. Through you, thank you, Ms. Cody, for the presentation and the work on the committee around the food response here at the city. I'm curious how familiar and how much communication you have with the Comox Valley Food Policy Council. I know that they've been very effective in moving forward different initiatives in the community and also creating a real collaborative hub for all members in the food system to work together there. And it looks like they've got a good model of how to get something like this rolling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I work very closely with Marita Prato, who leads that initiative. And it's the Lush Valley is the organization that's the lead community organization for the Food Policy Council and Comox. They're also a similar organization to Nanaimo Food Share in that both are designated as being island food hubs and receive a certain amount of funding through Island Health in order for us to take on projects like that specifically. I'm also, Marita and I work very closely together on a number of different initiatives. It was some of the work that Marita did that brought forward identifying where there's some gaps in emergency planning, and it was then there's a network of food policy councils that really communicate and work collaboratively in order to bring forward food policy issues in the province, including initiatives like that Karen had identified earlier with the Kamloops Food Policy Council, which has a 25-year history of being able to work collaboratively with the municipality in developing food policy for their region. And the Food Policy Council in Comox is relatively new, but I know from Marita that it was really critical in Comox's ability to respond to COVID, because unlike Nanaimo, which has really strong leadership in our food bank, the food bank was not able to respond to the COVID pandemic and the food needs that came out of the pandemic when COVID hit. They didn't have the same leadership, and many of their volunteers were seniors, and of course, they weren't able to actually come out and volunteer in the same way that they were able to organize it at the food bank here in Nanaimo. And so it was Lush Valley and the network through the Food Policy Council there that were able to step forward and really fill that gap to give some time and some space to the food bank in that community to be able to rally and then start providing services again over some time. So it's those established relationships that made a really big difference, and that's the work that happened with the working group here in Nanaimo that was led by Karen and Lisa in being able to start the different groups really talking well together, and it's that type of established relationship that means that the whole community has that opportunity to really understand where the resources are, where the gaps are, and then develop strategies and priorities in order to address some thoughtful planning to be able to respond so much better to food security issues that come up over time. And that's really the work of the World Health Organization also says that that's one of the key elements to be able to respond to an emergency, is that the community groups have existing relationships and existing communication processes in place so that when it hits the fan, then people are really able to mobilize and move forward in a way that's really productive because people already have an existing understanding of what's available.
Thanks.
Councillor Marvin.
Thank you. And through you. So this is terrific because I always get concerned about duplication of services. And I know before when I was on social planning that food security is paramount for health and wellness. Mm-hmm. And there used to be, and I can't remember what it used to be because we were very worried about food security and we put together, and I can't remember if it wasn't called Food Share, but it was something to bring together all the people that were working, all the organizations within our city. So my understanding is this would be collaborative and bring together all the groups so that we can best serve the needs.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for Ms. Cody? Thank you very much. And Councillor Armstrong, you've got a question for staff.
Actually, I want to refer this to a GPC because we had a discussion as a council that we weren't doing any more committees and we were going to be putting everything to the GPC to discuss committees, and this would form a committee because we have to have a staff person. I would like to know if we do have the capacity to deal with that. And I just believe it belongs at that GPC where we're going to be discussing the formation of new committees. Thank you.
Is there a
The motion to defer.
seconder for that? Councillor Thorpe? Yes, go ahead.
And Your Worship, I'm sorry, I just wanted to let Ms. Cody know that she doesn't have to.
Yes, sorry.
Thank you kindly.
Thank you very much.
So I guess my concern comes out that, if all of our different groups start saying we're making committees, and we had a decision that we were going to get away from the committee structure and go to a GPC structure, that we should be discussing this at a GPC to see if we want to go back to committees. Because if we have a staff person there, it's considered a committee. And a councillor there, it becomes a committee. Am I correct, Ms. Gurry?
Ms. Gurry?
Sorry, I'm having button issues. Thank you, Worship. Through you to Councillor Armstrong. No, for it to be considered a committee, it would need to have councillor members appointed to it. So council would create a committee, and if councillors are appointed to that committee, then it's a committee under the community charter. It would be considered a select committee.
So that's my concern. We're creating a committee. You said that we aren't going to do that we wanted to have a discussion on future committees, I believe was something that Councillor Thorpe said. So I think before we do this, we need to have that discussion, or again, we're going to be going down the road where every time we see a good idea, we're going to be creating a committee. And I'm concerned about the staff capacity, if they even have the capacity to have another committee with their limited resources and legislative services. Thank you.
Before I go to Councillor Gesselbrock, the request is that Council endorse the emergency food and nutrition strategy as formal stakeholder input into the Reimagine Nanaimo process. So we're being asked to consider it treated as input into the Reimagine Nanaimo process and support the creation of a Nanaimo Food Policy Council as independent arm-length body that would collaborate, blah, 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 and request that staff bring forward a report on how the city can facilitate this work. So as
I guess it's because she had a motion.
that's
where maybe I'm confused, because she put forward a motion.
And I appreciate that, and I'm just looking at what we have in front of us. So, and I'm wondering, Councillor Armstrong, if by passing this, we will be achieving the same effect, because frankly,
It's a
agree with you.
report, then fine, but I
I-
thought it was a motion that we were
I-
voting on. Sorry.
It is a good thing to come back to GPC. It would be a logical place for it after we have a staff report, though, that would assist us in having a hopefully meaningful discussion at GPC, but I may be off base, and
Because I think there's a motion actually in the report.
I appreciate that, but that's not the recommended motion.
If
Mr.
we
Lindsay,
pass
before
the
I go to
consent
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Your Worship, maybe if I could just clarify, and I think maybe there is some confusion, because in the presentation, there was separate motions that
Yeah.
maybe this evening, I think maybe premature on the governance structure of what this council could be like, but just to confirm, the idea is presented to the Health and Housing Task Force, and what's before you this evening, these two recommendations, are that it is an arm's length. You could call it a council, I would call it a working group or a task force, but it's not intended to be a committee of council. And I think the representation of who would represent the city on that committee is a matter that has yet to be discussed and be
So I will
further down the road.
Draw the deferral then based on that, because I thought we were voting on the motion that Ms. Jen put forward. My apologies.
Thank you very much, and keeping in mind we have no motion in front of us at this point. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. I was just hoping to move the recommendations there.
As in the...
Yeah.
Thank you. I have several other speakers. Yes, you are, Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. So speaking to the motion we now have on the floor, I'm fully in support of this. It's strange, I was going to recommend that the Emergency Food and Nutrition Security Strategy be forwarded to a GPC so that we could discuss, based on the number 2 here, what we'd like the Food Policy Group to do. And so I was kind of opposed to Councillor Armstrong's thing, but I actually want the same thing to happen. And the reason being is that there is much more to the strategy than a Food Policy Council, although that would be overreaching. There's basically 5 goals in this report with many objectives, and I think that Council I don't want to see one of these reports lie on a shelf somewhere. I think there's some very important issues in there. If you'll remember reading the report, there's a significant amount of money coming into this, into our town from COVID, specifically to feed people. And that money is not going to be there forever. So I think it's incumbent on us to take advantage of this money as it's coming in, review what's happening, and I think a GPC would be much, so at the end of this motion, I'll let him make a register.
Thank you. Councillor Martman? No, taking yourself off. Councillor Hemmons?
Thank you, Your Worship. Happy to support this recommendation. And I just want to take a moment to thank staff on this. So I had the opportunity through the Health and Housing Task Force to jump into these meetings. Dawn was the point councillor. But there were a few bumps throughout. And I just want to acknowledge that the one I'm thinking of was handled beautifully by staff. And I just want to acknowledge that a lot of really quick work went into this. This group met, I think, weekly during COVID. It was really fast. And I think staff did a really good job of working with the community on this one. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gesselbrock, do you wish to say anything?
Yeah, just to clarify, did we want the first motion to endorse the emergency food and nutrition strategy as a formal stakeholder input to be passed, or does it need to go to be referred first?
No, no.
Oh, okay.
The word, we're going by the wording of the motion. Ms. Gurry?
Thank you, Your Worship. So to what Councillor Bonner is speaking to, perhaps if the mover and seconder agreed, a third point could be made under there, that the emergency food and nutrition strategy be referred to the GPC for a GPC meeting for further discussion.
Look at that. We're going to save a motion. Councillor Bonner's happy, or the mover and seconder happy?
Yeah, I was just wondering if I could speak to the motion.
You want to gild the lily? We're all going to support it?
Yeah.
By all means.
No, I do want to thank the original genesis of this food working group, emergency working group getting together, and the staff work that went into it. I think that was a really great move, and I'm excited about the strategy, and also these food policy councils, I think, is a really good way to coordinate the community and move forward some long-held strategic planning, decisions that we've had for a long time on the books. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion on the motion, which now consists of 3 parts? Hearing none, all those in favor? Contrary? None? Thank you very much, everyone. We have no delegations that are unrelated to agenda items, and we're on to reports, bylaw and policy renewal project timeline. Ms. Gurry, there is a big job.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm going to be turning this over to Karen Robertson, the Deputy City Clerk, and she's going to go over this report, which is a bylaw policy renewal project timeline. It's an update on the bylaw and policy renewal project that Council adopted as part of its strategic plan. And she's also going to go through the 3 subsequent amendment bylaws that have come about because of this project. So I'm just going to turn it over to Karen Robertson now.
Ms. Robertson, thank you.
Good evening, and thank you, Mayor and Council, for giving me the opportunity to present this project to you. So, let me see. So in 2019, Council underwent a planning process to define its vision and values for the 2019-2022 Council term. And stemming out of that process, Council developed 4 strategic themes: environmental responsibility, livability, economic health, and governance excellence.
And within the governance excellence theme, one of the action items was to have a comprehensive review undertaken on council's bylaws and policies and to update those that were outdated, ineffective, or inconsistent with council's current objectives. I was assigned the responsibility to oversee and support this project and asked to develop a timeline of how the project would move forward. So the starting point for the project began with an audit on the city's bylaws and policies to identify gaps and determine priorities. Based on the findings, a work plan with deliverables was developed. And after receiving the support of my director and the CAO for the work plan, it was then introduced to the senior management team, and I'm now here in front of council to outline how the project is going to be done, which is proposed to be done in 2 phases. So the initial project focus will be on the bylaws, as they are the laws that set forth the governance structure of the city and address the big picture governance issues. They outline authority and establish parameters. And although the policies are also important, policies tend to address more of the operational issues, and they are more of a fluid document, often coming from bylaw direction. So it makes sense to take a look at the bylaws first to make sure that they reflect the intent of council and to look to modernize or repeal any associated policies from there. And currently, the city has approximately 6,500 bylaws, and they're housed in several folders. Numbering is inconsistent, and searches can only be done one at a time through a very cumbersome city search program. Although we have copies of all the bylaws, due to previous staffing turnover, they haven't always been consistently tracked. At one point, some years back, and with good intentions, many bylaws were placed in a folder entitled Obsolete, Repealed, or No Longer in Use. And in doing an audit of this folder, many of those bylaws have actually not been formally repealed, so they're kind of muddied in there. So although a number of these policies are probably obsolete and no longer in use, until they're formally repealed, they're still in effect. We also need to establish a master bylaw registry that is user-friendly and easily searchable. And I recommend recording all the bylaw details in an Excel spreadsheet. The best part of this is that it's free. It was also transferred very nicely into our new electronic document management program that we're going to be embarking on soon. The process is going to be painstaking and fussy, but is absolutely necessary for the purposes of this project. Now, I apologize that this is super tiny, but I just did want to give you an idea of what it's going to look like. It's going to outline the key aspects of all the bylaws. So there'll be the bylaw number, the name of the bylaw, the date of the readings, and this will make it really easy to track the corresponding report where the bylaw was introduced. It'll note the assent of the electors, if applicable, ministerial approval, if applicable, and it's also important to note that you can't just repeal a bylaw that had ministerial approval. You have to get ministerial approval to then repeal the bylaw. So it doesn't matter how old it is. The date of the adoption will be recorded, which bylaw it amends, which bylaw it repeals, what bylaw it is amended by, and finally any applicable notes. Those that are highlighted in red or showing orange on the screen up there means that the bylaws those are the ones that would be repealed, so it will be easy at a glance to identify the ones that are current. Hyperlinks will also be embedded in each of the numbers, so staff can simply click on the link and the bylaw will be instantly available. I do want to point out that this is for internal use only. The public will continue to access the most current and commonly used bylaws in their consolidated form on the city's website. So as the registry project proceeds, staff will be earmarking those that need to be repealed and those that may need to be updated. For those bylaws that need to be repealed, a running list will be developed, and quarterly, and probably more like twice a year, staff will come forward with a bylaw repeal bylaw, which is basically one bylaw that lists a whole bunch of them to be repealed. And I think actually council and members of the public will find this quite interesting and kind of fun, because I am sure we're going to unearth some oldies but goodies as we go along in the process. It's also important to ensure that we have PDF versions of all signed bylaws, as this is critical for business continuity purposes, particularly if we had a flood or a fire. The task of scanning these bylaws started in the spring, so the project is well underway, and those remaining will be scanned when the bylaws are being added to the registry. So while the registry is being developed, this does not stop the process of having bylaws being updated on an ongoing basis. The appointment of officers bylaw has already been considered by council, and the others noted on the screen will be coming forward in 2020 for council's consideration. The set of bylaws that govern the city's ticketing processes needs to be addressed quickly. The fine schedules have not been kept up to date, and we have 4 ticketing options that have caused confusion for staff. And a few of the bylaws related to this are on this evening's agenda. The bylaw offense notice system, which was implemented in 2012, is a system used for fines up to $500. It is a cost-effective system whereby ticket disputes are administered through adjudication as opposed to the courts. We also have other local government participation to share in running the program. The second system we have is the municipal ticketing system, and it's a program available for fines up to $1,000. Now, this system is cumbersome to use, as disputes must be dealt with through the courts, and for the money, it's very challenging. Often staff members sit there for quite a bit during the day. It can get postponed. You have legal representation. It's just not worth it for that money. So staff will be coming forward with a recommendation to repeal that bylaw. The third system is the standard long-form ticketing system process, and this is under the authority of the Offence Act, and it is reserved for the most egregious offenses. And while disputes are dealt with through the court system, it is a necessary process for those more serious offenses, and the legislation just changed whereby you can write tickets up to this for up to $50,000. So when you're looking at somebody perhaps taking a whole swath of trees out, that's when you'd be looking at utilizing that system. The fourth system that's been in place is one that was new to me when I came here, and it's called the super ticket. And this was put in place in 2005 and was used prior to the bylaw adjudication system that came in 2012. It's no longer relevant and should just be abolished. Other bylaws coming up for council's consideration in November are the new animal responsibility bylaw, and that'll be coming forward at the governance and priorities meeting in November, and also the start of a new fees and charges bylaw. So for 2021 and 2022, staff will continue to work with subject matter experts on updating and modernizing the bylaws that are creating issues, as well as ones resulting from council's direction. An example of a bylaw and policy matter that came to light recently was the rules regarding election signage. The matter has caused some confusion in the past, so I was asked to look into it. In researching where the authority originally came from, I discovered that we have 3 city bylaws, a council policy, and a ministry policy that all reference election signage, but they conflict. The Traffic and Highways bylaw states that political signage must be removed no later than 30 days after the date of the election or referendum. The sign bylaw, which also references political and campaign signage, says it must be removed within 7 days after the election or referendum. We also have a policy that states provincial regulations do not permit signage to be placed along the Parkway or Duke Point corridor, but this policy was put in place based on a ministry policy back in 2001. So it puts the onus on staff to keep on top of those things when it's not necessary. You simply refer them to the ministry policy for that. So for the current provincial election, we went with the most generous time frame of 30 days, but staff will need to address this prior to any future elections. So as we motor along in 2021, staff will have a better idea what has been accomplished and what the focus will be for 2022 in terms of bylaw modernization. Staff will provide council with a full update on the year's accomplishments in the fall of 2021 when the business plans are presented to council. However, status updates can be provided at any time. In terms of the policy project, the city has a hard copy of all of council's policies in a binder. Some are current, which are posted on the website. Others are current but outdated, and some are historical. In 2010, staff started the process of modernizing and repealing outdated policies, which was picked up again in 2016. The policies were circulated to managers to seek feedback on whether the policy was still relevant. If so, should it remain as is? Does it need amending? Or if it isn't relevant, confirmation on whether it can be repealed. Feedback was received by the various managers, but the work was not concluded. So as some of these policies were already identified as needing to be repealed, staff will be bringing forward a report by the end of November with a list of those policies to be repealed. And as with bylaws, policies will need to be updated on an ongoing and priority basis. For example, our current public hearing policy only outlines what the process is for processing correspondence. The Development Approval and Notification Procedures bylaw outlines the application process and the fees, but there's still some confusion on the process itself, particularly as to how long an applicant can speak, as well as members of the public. So it would be helpful to expand the policy to outline the process so it's clear for the applicant, the public, and council, and staff plan to bring that forward as an amendment to the policy before the end of the year. It will also be helpful to have a master council policy registry that outlines council policies by department and historical by department as well, so one can go back in time to see what a particular policy said at a certain point. And in reviewing the policies, some are actually suited as administrative policies that should be signed off by the CAO, so these will also need to be assessed. So with the primary focus being on the bylaws, more specific deliverables in terms of the policies will be identified in 2021. And again, it does not prevent the more emergent policies from being developed on an ongoing basis, or if there is a desire by council to switch priorities, this can also be accommodated. And I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
Ms. Robertson, thank you very much. Councillor Hemmons.
My inner organizational nerd just loved this report and loved this process. I have a question regarding some specific language, though. On page 2, you discuss using plain language to provide better enforceability. Can you just unpack that for me a little bit?
I think when one is developing bylaws, sometimes people will generally do a Google search, maybe to another municipality, perhaps like size, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that bylaw is good for our purposes. It might be quite old. And some of the language is kind of archaic, and it makes it challenging to interpret, and just then mix it a bit gray. I think if you're using plain language, and the go-to is doing a Google search on a word, that's often what the courts will do as well, is they'll look to that, and, oh, that's what the common thought process is. So just keeping it as simple as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Just want to say this looks awesome, and thank you for your work on it. And I'm looking forward to hearing some archaic bylaws be brought forward for entertainment's sake.
So excited.
Curious. Thank you.
Oh, sure, want to get rid of all the old folks. Councillor Turley.
You weren't referring to me, were you?
Not at all.
Thank you, Your Worship. To you, to Ms. Robertson. Today I had the opportunity to go through the street entertainers bylaw and the noise bylaw, and there's some inconsistencies on the actual times in those two, which I'm sure you're aware of. The street entertainment is only allowed between 10 a.m. and 10 p.m., whereas the noise bylaw referring to music is allowable between 9 a.m. and 11 p.m. So, you know, I can understand how difficult your job's going to be. So, thank you.
Yeah, and I think too, when departments in good faith are doing their bylaws, they have a certain lens to it. And even when you are consulting with other departments, there's still, some of those bylaws are so comprehensive and include so many things, it's challenging to catch them all. So that's what Ledge Services is for.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. In terms of archaic, one of my favorites is it's okay for me to take my pet chicken to Bowen Park, but if I let it off the leash and it eats some grass, I can be fined $75. So I'm hoping I'll be able to do that without being fined soon in the future.
Some chicken.
Have to see what the animal bylaw says.
My two questions I have, if I may, you referred to some of the bylaws will be online. Would they all be online so that a person could look through them all if they needed to be?
That makes it challenging. You want to put the ones online that are most commonly referred to. And if we find that there's ones that are being repeatedly asked for, obviously you would put those online. But I think a massive amount of bylaws can be confusing for people. And we also want to encourage them to check with legislative services to make sure that they're not interpreting the wrong bylaw or so we just put the most commonly referred to ones in their consolidated form on the website.
So how would a person know that they're doing something against the bylaw if they don't know it exists? Until the bylaw officer shows up and tells them they're not going to fine.
Ignorance of the law is no excuse.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that one. How does somebody not know their?
Well, how do you
breaking
know
the
you're
law?
not following a bylaw if you don't know what the bylaw is, I guess, if they have no way of finding out what the bylaw is?
I think generally people would have a question about something, and then they would go to look to see if there is a bylaw on it, and if not, they can certainly contact Legislative Services, and we can advise them. But I don't know too many people that just sit and will try and memorize a plethora of bylaws.
I think Councillor Hammonds would probably.
Your worship, I think Councillor Bonner is referring to those bylaws that are in effect or that need to be adhered to are on our website for reference. If somebody in the public was looking to make sure what they are doing matches one of our bylaws, if it wasn't on the website, they could contact Legislative Services to see if there was a bylaw in effect that referred to whatever it is they were wondering about, if they would be breaching the bylaw or not. And the one other comment I just wanted to make in the bylaw registry, when the first column is bylaw numbers, well, back in 1874, and the City of Nanaimo's first bylaw, they didn't number those bylaws. They were just named. So this makes this project that much more difficult, going back to see what bylaw repealed what bylaw when it's not a number repealing a number, it's a name. And reading handwritten minutes and bylaws to find out what repealed what bylaw, if they even were repealed properly back then.
Councillor Bonner,
Thank you.
follow-up.
Yeah, well, that would be Jim's dad's fault, yeah. The other question I have is actually more long range. I was talking with a number of people almost short time after I got elected in that, and looking at bylaw review. And one of the ideas was to have a small group of staff who actually follow bylaws, and they review bylaws in each department every 5 years, but they are the ones that do that work, so that there's continuity between knowing how that some bylaw in this department actually conflicts with the bylaw over in this department, sort of thing. How do you plan on keeping these up to date over a period of time, so that we're not doing this whole thing again 20 years from now?
Go ahead.
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. So besides the registry, which will, going forward, keep everybody on track, everybody will have a process they have to follow, and we'll be able to better track and know for as long as we're here, what bylaw repealed what bylaw, and what bylaw was meant to take care of a certain issue. But as well as that, we are going to be developing bylaw guidelines that will ensure staff know when creating a bylaw, besides going through our department to ensure that the Legislative Services Department has had their eyes on it, but also other subject matter experts in other departments, that collaboration is happening. There'll be guidelines that say what needs to be in a bylaw and what should and shouldn't be in a bylaw, and all of those guidelines will be in place that we're developing along with this project.
And in terms, is there a timeline when that would be reviewed?
The bylaw guidelines will be reviewed. Is there a timeline for?
No, I'm thinking if you make a specific bylaw and you've done all that work and it's all done up, when do we look at it again to make sure it's not out of date?
Bylaws tend to be, and Ms. Robertson can jump in if she has something further to add, but they tend to be living documents. I find as soon as a bylaw is adopted by council, there needs to be an amendment made. So I find that bylaws live throughout their tenure, and amendments are made when necessary. And during every amendment, there is that look at the whole bylaw to see if there's any other amendments that need to be made at that time to get it all done, and the 3 readings and approvals all done at that one time. However, like I said, it seems the minute they're adopted, oops, there's something else that should have been done. So they seem to carry on and be updated and reviewed throughout their tenure until they're repealed. Do you have?
Councillor Brown, you're just a tiny little square in my screen. Did you have a question? No, thank you. I just didn't want you to feel you might be being ignored in the circumstances. Thank you very much, Ms. Robertson. Much appreciated.
Okay.
Maybe I'll just, I think my report's next anyway, so I'll just hang out.
She's
The
staying
next-
for the next one, Your Worship, yes.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. The next is bylaw notice enforcement bylaw amendment, fines for zoning and tree protection regulations. Ms. Gurry, you're shown as introducing it, but I take it you're just going to introduce Ms. Robertson and tell her to carry on. Is that correct? By all means, please do. Ms. Robertson.
Okay, thank you. And council can approach this one of two ways. I can just introduce the initial bylaw, and if you like, council could consider its readings, or if you like, I can do a run-through of all three of them, and then council can...
One at a time.
One at a time?
Councillor Armstrong?
Okay, I'll just introduce them all just to give you an overview of them, and then you can just consider all the readings at once. So, as just mentioned, one of the deliverables is to streamline the city's ticketing system to include consistent violation and penalty language within the regulatory bylaws. And that way, bylaw enforcement officers are able to issue tickets through the city's bylaw dispute adjudication registry system, which is also known as DARS. And the three bylaws before council this evening are the first in a series of bylaws to contain the consistent violation and penalty language. So the first one is the zoning amendment, and in addition to updating the violation and penalty language for issuing tickets, it currently only authorizes tickets to be issued under the Offence Act, so that's being rectified tonight. And also to remove the fine schedule from the bylaw and add it into the bylaw notice enforcement bylaw. And other than those amendments, there's nothing else substantive, and it does meet with, is consistent with the official community plan, so staff are recommending that council also waive the requirements to hold a public hearing for that amendment. The second one is the Management and Protection of Trees Amendment bylaw, and this is similar to the proposed zoning amendment, and that the penalty language is being updated and giving the authority so that tickets can be issued under the DARS system. The third bylaw is the actual bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw, and this is where those fine schedules would then be incorporated into the bylaw. But there is a second change, which is Schedule B, and it's called the registry, and it needs to formally authorize the participation of the City of Port Alberni, the Regional District of Nanaimo, the Regional District of Alberni-Clayoquot, and the Village of Port Clements to participate in the DARS program. And their participation, along with the City of Duncan, District of Tofino, and City of Parksville, who joined in 2014, collectively share together in the cost to run the program. So each of those local governments that I mentioned all got their council approval previously in 2019. We just have to cross our T's by replacing the Schedule B to make it formal at the City of Nanaimo. And that's it, unless there's any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown, in light of the fact you're coming to us via Zoom or whatever, I'm not going to ask you to read the appropriate motions tonight and break a little precedence, if that's all right.
Could I have a question?
Yes,
Your Worship?
Councillor Thorpe, sorry.
Thank you. Just before we get into the readings of the bylaws, through you, if I may, to Ms. Robertson, and this is not related to the specific bylaws, but the DARS, the Dispute Adjudication Registry System, which you referenced very quickly just a minute ago. And it is in our report, and councillors are familiar with it, but I wonder if you could take just a minute to explain what that is for the people that are viewing, to do with the adjudication of bylaws, what that consists of, basically how it operates, just a 30-second précis.
Okay, so there was legislation that was provided that if you apply to the provincial government and you get approved, which we were, you can operate the system where they bring an adjudicator up, and I believe they come from Victoria. And the burden of proof when you're processing these tickets are that it's likely to have happened. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what the case is when you go to the court system. So if it's a parking ticket, which the majority of these are, here's a picture of your car on the yellow line. Is it likely to have happened? Yes. The person can dispute it. If they do, if they lose, they'll pay an additional $25. It's a very, very effective system because of that. And what we do is we share collectively in the cost to bring the adjudicator up. So if there was 4 municipalities that had 2 tickets each, we would share in 25% each municipality in the cost to bring the adjudicator up to process the files. It can be done by phone, Skype, in person, in writing. It's very accessible for everyone. You don't actually have to appear in person, and it's a very cost-effective system.
Thank you. And if I may, Your Worship, just as a follow-up then, it's basically an independent, qualified, neutral third party which is doing the adjudication. And can I ask you this, Ms. Robertson, or maybe Ms. Gurry would answer instead, do elected officials have any role in either the enforcement or the adjudication process?
No.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thorpe. So I'm wondering if there are no more questions, if someone cares to take on the acting mayor's role and read the motions that are set out.
Who's next in line?
Councillor
Councillors and/or Councillor Bonner.
Councillor Hemmons, please jump in. Page 6.
Thank you. I move that, sorry, I just want to make sure I'm in the right, Management and Protection of Trees. I move that Management and Protection of Trees Amendment Bylaw 2020, number 7126.01, to replace the violation and penalties.
Before that.
No, before that, thank you.
Zoning amendment bylaw.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Recommendation.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've got it. Thank you. Okay, there's a lot here. So I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2020, number 4500.179, to replace the violation and penalty section and delete the fine schedule pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Hemmons.
I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2020, number 4500.179, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Councillor Hemmons.
And I move that whereas 464, Section 2 of the Local Government Act permits council to waive the holding of a public hearing where a proposed zoning amendment bylaw is consistent with the official community plan, and whereas zoning amendment bylaw number 2020, number 4500.179 is consistent with the official community plan bylaw 2008, number 6500, be it resolved that council waives the holding of a public hearing with respect to zoning amendment bylaw 2020, number 4500.179.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Councillor Hemmons.
I move that Management and Protection of Trees Amendment Bylaw 2020, number 7126.01, to replace the violation and penalty section and delete the fine schedule pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any contrary? Motion carries. Thank you.
I move that Management and Protection of Trees Amendment Bylaw number 2020, number 7126.01, pass second reading, pardon me.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you.
I move that Management and Protection of Trees Amendment Bylaw 2020, number 7126.01, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. And once more with feeling.
I move that Bylaw Notice Enforcement Bylaw 2020, number 7159.08, to replace the fine schedule for the zoning amendment bylaw, add a fine schedule for the Management of Trees bylaw, and replace Schedule B registry agreement, pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you.
I move that Bylaw Notice Enforcement Bylaw 2020, number 7159.08, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Thank you.
And I move that Bylaw Notice Enforcement Bylaw 2020, number 7159.08, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Robertson. We're on to item C, options for prohibiting bottling of groundwater within the city of Nanaimo. Mr. Lindsay, we've been superseded by the feds and run into some legal issues here that would make this, notwithstanding the good, clean, pure hearts of council, make this a rather problematic proposition. So I'm looking forward to this presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think you stole my thunder a little bit. I think the report speaks for itself, but maybe quickly just to introduce it and maybe summarize the key points from staff's perspective. And as outlined in the report, this came originally from a presentation you received last spring now regarding the extraction and concern about the impacts of bottling groundwater from an area north of Courtenay, actually, in Merville. You had the delegation that evening. And then in May of last year, Council actually directed staff to prepare a report regarding options for consideration of a bylaw that prohibits the bottling of groundwater within the city of Nanaimo in order to help protect groundwater today and for the future. So, Your Worship, this report is in response to that motion from Council. And there's really, as I mentioned, I think I'll let the report speak for itself, but there's really three things that I would highlight. And the first, I believe, is what, Your Worship, you're referring to, is the province is actually responsible for the licensing of groundwater extraction. And they are, to be honest, they're relatively late to the game, maybe compared to other provinces. It's only within the last, I think it's only within the last 5 or 6 years that the province has actually stepped up and started licensing groundwater extraction. But in the case that was referred to in your delegation, they had actually been provided a license by the province. So the province is responsible for managing those licenses, ensuring that there's any impacts on the aquifers are mitigated when those licenses are issued. So that's the first point we'd make, Your Worship. The second is, and you have this issue of spheres of concurrent authority, and you've had them on other topics like the plastic bag discussion recently, where councils can look at bylaws that have an underlying environmental reason for their adoption, but because of that spheres of concurrent authority, they have to be referred to the province for approval. So a bylaw such as this, if council wanted to proceed down this road, and if the rationale was largely an environmental one, it would go again to the province for referral and approval. Your Worship, we did look at, are there other mechanisms or tools, legislation that's available should a council wish to proceed with a bylaw such as this? We believe there are abilities under your zoning bylaw if there was a land use rationale of why the bylaw should be adopted. Not an environmental rationale, but a land use rationale. And in the case of something like bottling of groundwater from outside of the municipality, other communities that have went down this road have referred to things like, well, allowing for this resource to be imported into the community and bottled within the city would have a negative impact on our road infrastructure. The transportation of that material would have negative impact. And Your Worship, from staff's perspective, that's a difficult argument to make and to single out one raw material when, of course, we have all types of raw materials that come into the community, and also that we have our own water that's used by industries here for processing and as part of their actual materials. At the end of the day, it would be, in our opinion, a very difficult argument to make that there is a land use argument specific to groundwater. So for those reasons, Your Worship, the report recommends that council not proceed with the bylaw.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Mr. Lindsay. Given the spheres of concurrent authority, as in with the plastic bag regulation, it still doesn't stop us from drafting up a bylaw and sending it down to the minister for approval.
Your Worship, I think that's a good point. What I would note is what's different than that specific discussion is the province at that time was not regulating plastic bags. They have no regulation, no licensing about it. Municipalities were trying to step out ahead of that. In this case, the province actually has a licensing program, a licensing scheme in place for water extraction. So I think if the council decided to bring forward a bylaw and send it to the province, the question would be, well, why are you bringing in a bylaw that already regulates what the province regulates? A little bit different than the plastic bag bylaw.
Just to follow up, in the last, there was a case when the province took on regulating bottling water where they provided a license for a facility up in Merville.
Sorry, Your Worship, I missed the question.
In this recent case, why this was brought to an issue to local jurisdictions to address, the province, under their new regulatory regime, granted a license for a facility up in Merville to extract water to sell as bottled water.
That's correct, Your Worship. That's our understanding, was the genesis of that delegation you received. But our staff's point is, because the province has that licensing scheme in place, they presumably, when they issued that license for extraction of groundwater in Merville, would have evaluated the impacts on the aquifer and determined that it was an appropriate license to be granted. So,
I very much appreciate Councillor Gesselbrock's concerns about this, but as Mr. Lindsay's explained to us, in order for us to regulate this, we have to tie it back into land use. And that would be very difficult when it's the province regulating the water. And my suspicion, and I'm not presupposing how the vote's going to go, but my suspicion is all we do is we may run it up the flag and we'll all feel better, but it would probably be subject to a fairly easy legal challenge, and we would almost invite litigation if anyone ever tried to proceed. For instance, if someone did get a provincial license, for which I think there would be whole hell to pay in this community, if a license was granted and we tried to stop it, so to speak, with a bylaw, I think we would be in very weak grounds. But I look forward to the discussion. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's unfortunate. I read through the report and I said, oh, darn. Then I thought, okay, so we can't do it because the province is regulating this, but we regulate zoning and land use. So could we not make bottling water facility a site-specific zoning so that everyone who wanted to do that, not that they're banging on our doors right now, would have to actually go through a rezoning process, at which time the public would have their input and council would be able to make a decision?
Your Worship, I would think in general right now, we do not govern the bottling of water, whether it comes from the city's surface system or from groundwater. But generally, industries through our zoning are allowed to use water for their own purposes. We have a metered water system. They pay for the water that they use for processing or for part of it. Could council amend the bylaw and introduce such a restriction? I think yes. I think the unintended consequences, and it's probably something you'd want to think through, would be the number of businesses out there right now that you would deem or make legal non-conforming because they use water in one way or another. And I'm thinking of breweries or other facilities that use city water for their production of their goods. But it's certainly if council wanted us to review further, it's something I think we would have to look into.
I can see a faint glimmer of enthusiasm for the idea there, but it was just an idea.
To Your Worship, can I mention, I think it's also worth noting too that the city allows for commercial enterprises to take bulk water from our system and disperse it throughout the region to areas that have limited access to groundwater. So that's occurring now. We have the city's installed 2 facilities. I recall, and Mr. Sims is nodding yes, in recent time where metered systems, one on Labio and one out closer to Duke Point, to facilitate such a venture. So we've actively been encouraging that use.
Councillor Armstrong.
I'd like to move option 1.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess I used up my first question because I was going to move an alternate motion there, but Councillor Armstrong beat me to the chase. I don't support this option. I think that this issue of extracting groundwater and the potential to be able to sell it commercially as bottled water is an abhorrent idea. And I think that given that the province does have a regulatory regime that looks at these case by case, and they do sometimes grant it, I think as a city, regardless of this issue of concurrent spheres, I think as messaging and to send a signal to the province, I think that we should draft up a bylaw and send it for ministerial approval, that prohibits the bottling of groundwater. I think that the city, using a shared resource like this commercially, I think it doesn't fit in alignment with our community values, and I think that we did commit, I think last council's term to be a blue community, and if folks don't know what a blue community is, a blue community encourages municipalities and Indigenous communities to support the idea of water commons framework, recognizing that water is a shared resource for all by passing resolutions that recognize water and sanitation as a human right, ban or phase out the sale of bottled water in municipal facilities and municipal events, and promote publicly financed, owned, and operated water and wastewater services. I think the potential of moving down to using shared groundwater for private sale is something that we want to make sure that there's barriers at every level to go do this. By sending this to the minister for approval, I think it just tells where this community stands, and it's one act that we can do. Even if in Nanaimo, it's unlikely given the groundwater situation here to have ever a viable plant be put here, I think that we have the capacity to send this message from this community, and hopefully, the regional district in Nanaimo can follow suit, as other communities have done so as well. So I'll be voting against recommendation 1 and supporting an alternative. Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong?
The reason I'm voting for it is, first of all, it is a provincial responsibility, and they're taking it very seriously. The other thing people forget about in cases of natural disasters, we do need bottled water, regardless of what people think or want to believe, because our systems get, you can't use them. You take a look when the earthquakes hit in all those areas, they all needed bottled water. So we do have to have a system of doing that, so you can't prohibit it from all over the place. I think the government's doing a good job of protecting our water rights. As staff says, the unintended consequences, so we shut down every brewery in town, because that's technically bottled water. I think you're thinking little ones, but that's not the definition. So you have to be really careful of that, because we are going to hurt a lot of businesses, and we're trying to help businesses not put further detriments in their place. I think sometimes we have our personal beliefs, which sometimes cross over into the provincial mandate, and we have to be really careful of that. And we say, yeah, it's just a letter, but it is staff time, and it's something that we don't have jurisdiction over. So for me, I'm voting in support of it, because I don't think it's got a chance of happening, and I do think that the government's taken it very seriously. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmens?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll be supporting the motion primarily because I don't see a crisis on the horizon that would necessitate us doing this, and I think we have enough on our plates and staff's plates that we don't need to chase these. I agree with the ethics and the values that brought this forward. When this first came forward, I think it was about a year ago, I remember asking Director Craig, who lives on Gabriola Island and sits at the RDN with us, and Gabriola gets much of their water bottled from Nanaimo, and so this would really have implications for that community. So for those reasons, I'll be supporting. Thank you.
Councillor Martman?
Thank you. I will not be supporting the motion. And I'm not as concerned about us rushing into how we address this. But this isn't about a personal belief. This is about protecting water for future generations. And we may not always have a government that's sympathetic to protecting water. We could have a government that's in there for having Nestle come in. Whatever we can do, and maybe it's a bylaw about land use, my understanding from reading the report is right now the water that is used and bottled by either Coca-Cola or breweries, etc., are using city water. I'm looking to Mr. Lindsay to confirm that, right? Yeah. It's paid water from our city.
Your Worship, in all cases that I'm aware of, anybody in town producing or using water as part of their processing would be using city water, with the exception of the mill, obviously, which has their own water source, but generally that's correct,
yes.
City water.
But what I'm worried about is a future. I understand it's province, But I also agree with Councillor Gesselbrock that any type of statement that we can make in the future, any type of bylaw that will help protect groundwater, and I'm not sure what it looks like, but I would like us to spend the time to figure out what our statement is as a city that says we want to protect our groundwater as much as we can. So with that, I won't be supporting the motion.
Councillor Gesselbrock?
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to clarify a couple statements that were made from some of the councillors. First off, I think having bottled water for emergency use is an important thing, as Councillor Armstrong has pointed out. And by no means does this type of motion, sending a bylaw for ministerial approval to prohibit the extraction of groundwater for private bottled water, have anything to do with limiting the ability to bottle water for emergencies. As Mr. Lindsay states, and we have bulk water agreements with many organizations, and anybody can bottle the city water that is a publicly owned asset and sell it again. That's also addressing Councillor Hemmons' point about the situation of Gabriola that requires sometimes a bulk water agreement. They're purchasing that bulk water from city-owned and publicly owned water infrastructure, not from a privately owned well that extracts commons water for private sale. So that's the ability to tap into groundwater that's shared by everybody and is an environmental resource, and then privatizing it and then selling it. Much different than taking it from the city's publicly owned system. So it's an important distinction to make. I think that by sending a bylaw for minister approval, it is a grassroots statement of how we want our water resources owned and operated. And although the province is regulating this, they are giving, in cases where there is an abundance of groundwater, permits for private extraction, and I think that it's something that we do need to not allow, especially within our region. Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I might as well weigh in on this, seeing as everybody else is. I'll be supporting the recommendation of staff. I think Mr. Lindsay's report was very clear, and to me it made sense. The bottom line is this is a provincial jurisdiction. I'm not at all convinced that it's worth our time and effort to engage in a virtue signaling exercise that, as you often refer to, a solution in search of a problem. And that's how this seems to me. I note in the report the advantage of doing other than the recommendation is to address a delegate's request who is from Merville. And they might have their problems, but I don't think we have that concern here. And if it threatens to come up, I think, as Councillor Bonner has indicated, there would be other avenues of doing this. So I'm quite content with provincial jurisdiction on this matter, and I think we should just move on. Thanks.
What we're really being asked to do tonight is to send a signal to the world, to Victoria in particular, that we're not going to support the bottling of aquifer or commons water, to use Councillor Gesselbrock's phrase, which is absolutely apt. We're not going to support that concept. But to go through a process to enact a bylaw, which I think based on Mr. Lindsay, Mr. Holmes' report to council and general knowledge of the law, would be an exercise that is not enforceable, reminds me of what a wise RCMP officer said to my Law 11 class in high school, literally 50 years ago in 1970, with respect to laws relating to marijuana, that a law that couldn't be enforced was a bad law. That's all he felt compelled to say when the question was raised about legalization of personal marijuana for personal use. Now here we are 50 years later, acknowledging that the whole regime for decades wasn't terribly effective. And to some extent, that's what we're being asked to do tonight, is to support a bylaw that in this case isn't really enforceable, I think would be subject to a legal challenge. when I would happily support simply a resolution of this council that calls on the provincial government to never enact legislation and to allow the licensing of groundwater for bottled production in British Columbia. I mean, let's go whole hog. Let's not just talk about Nanaimo. I mean, and that sends the signal as well. I appreciate the desire to do so, but I can't support a bylaw that I don't believe is legally valid or enforceable and is going to be subject to a lawsuit. And we'll either have to withdraw at that point, or we're going to have to pay lawyers with, no offense, the money of the good citizens of Nanaimo to defend it in court to get the end result, which I suspect will be that the bylaw will be struck down. And for what purpose? So that we could say proudly, well, you know, we defended our groundwater. I don't think so, and I think the likelihood of that ever happening, by the way, is quite slim because, as Mr. Lindsay's pointed out, pretty unlikely anyone's going to try and tap a well within the boundaries of the city of Nanaimo to bottle the water that comes out of it. So I've inspired Councillor Gesselbrock again, and it's only out of a sense of kindness, notwithstanding it's 8:35, I'm going to let him speak one more time before I call the question.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to clarify your point. If we enact a bylaw and send it to ministerial approval and they do approve it, we would not be at risk of a legal challenge. So I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All those in favor of the motion? Contrary? Councillors Bonner, Martman, and Gesselbrock, and Councillor Brown as well. Motion carries. Thank you very much. On to the next. Covenant Amendment Application Number CA13-160, 1070, 1074, and 1098 Douglas Avenue and 280 10th Street. Mr. Lindsay, please.
Your Worship, with your permission, I'd like to ask our Director Holm to come forward and introduce this item. And I know the agenda says on the next 4 items that I'd be introducing them, but because of our COVID protocols, I'd just like Mr. Holm to stay up here and introduce the next 4 items. I will return on item H, Your Worship.
Sounds good, Mr. Lindsay. That desk is going to be so worn out by the time COVID's finished, we'll have to get a new one. Mr. Holm, welcome.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Council, Your Worship. The first item here that I'd like to speak to is covenant amendment application for a property at 10th and, or a number of properties at 10th and Douglas. Covenant amendment application CA13. This is for properties that were originally rezoned in 1997, and along with that rezoning, covenant was registered on title at that time. Securing a number of items I'll speak to in a minute. Attachment B, I don't know if we can bring that up, but that shows the location of the property. And the properties are currently zoned under the under bylaw 4500, the current City of Nanaimo zoning bylaw. They're zoned CC1, R6, and R8. You can see there. So a mixed zone and a number of parcels that are contemplated for further subdivision. So part of the covenant, the original covenant secured in 1997 secured a subdivision plan for the property that included a number of smaller parcels along with a public road connecting through from 10th Street to Douglas. The proposed amendment would be to remove the public road through the site and to revise the subdivision plan to include larger lots that would be more flexible and would be developed through subsequent subdivision and then development permit applications into multifamily under the current zoning multifamily and a commercial site on the local servicing commercial site on the corner. So yeah, part of the covenant amendment would be removal of public road through the site and also securing a subdivision plan that has larger, more flexible lots that are more responsive to current market conditions. As well, in lieu of the public road, or in place of the public road, I guess we're looking at securing 2 multi-use trails, pathways through the site. One would run from the northwest corner of the property at Douglas along the, outside the riparian setback for Wexford Creek towards the southeast corner of the property on 10th Street. And the other would run from the corner of Douglas and 10th towards Apple Green Park, which you can see connects to Apple Green Avenue at the northeast corner of the site. So some significant public pedestrian connections there as well. The 10th Street intersection at Douglas, we would be looking at securing a crosswalk, which is part of what's proposed through subdivision there, to connect to the Parkway Trail, which is obviously is an important trail connector that was has grown in popularity since 1997 quite tremendously. So those are sort of the general amendments, as well as removal of an amendment, or a requirement for a private amenity building that would have been required on one of the lots under the previous covenant that was secured in 1997. Under Council's covenant amendment process policy, a covenant amendment of this nature can proceed through notification similar to a development variance permit. If Council were to give the go-ahead tonight based on the recommendation, we would be proceeding to notification and bringing the proposal back to Council at a future meeting for consideration of direction to proceed with the amendment. Happy to take any questions if you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Holm. Councillor Martman and Councillor Turley.
And through you, just a question. When there's a covenant on a property, because I'm wondering about, as covenants are coming before us, whether or not it's actually needed. So if there's a covenant on here right now, does Council have the right to just remove a covenant and not amend it, but just say there's not going to be a covenant anymore?
That would be a possibility. That's not what's being asked for, or not what we'd recommend. There's value in securing some of the items that we're discussing here. We think that there's public value in that.
Okay, thank you.
I think, if I understand you, Councillor Martman, because it is a covenant between the owners of the property for the time being, wherever they are in the city just can't remove it per se without the consent or agreement of the owner, and or an amendment through Council and a decision.
Okay.
Mr. Holm?
Yeah, maybe if you don't mind, I might expand a little bit just to say that I think historically covenants are an important tool in land use planning in British Columbia. Since 1997, there's sort of a more mature approval regime around development permits, development permit area guidelines, even through the subdivision process. And you see the nature of development is quite different, quite more complex and mature. Back in that time period, it wasn't uncommon to secure a lot of details through covenants, which we can more flexibly and better address through other development approval tools that we have in place now. And I think that's why you sometimes see these older covenants, why they're brought forward to you for consideration. And there's some details in there that are kind of unnecessary, but some of the principles are sound, but some of the details are unnecessary.
That helps clarify it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Holm. I just wanted to clarify that the amendment, covenant amendment application number CA 13, one of the things it doesn't pertain to is density. And then when I read the proposed amendments, on the next page, it refers to the previous plan having 9 smaller multifamily lots, and then the new one will be 4, I think it was 4, future multifamily development parcels. So is that the overall, there's no increase in the actual number of units, or is it more concentrated in larger areas, I guess?
Yeah, through your worship, to speak to Councillor Turley's question. So the density provision that applies to the land, the way the zoning bylaw treats it, it's a floor area ratio typically that responds to, so it's the area of building that you can build on a given area of land. So whether we cut that land up into, given the zoning that applies here, if we cut the land up into more parcels, you can still get the same given area of building, if that makes sense. Does that respond to your question?
Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's no other questions for Mr. Holm, would someone care to make the motion? Moved, Councillor Bonner, seconded, Councillor Turley. Any discussion? Councillor Thorpe?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I'd just like to say that I do have some concerns when we talk about amending covenants, but I read this report carefully, and to me, this is a case where it does make sense. I like the revised plan, and I don't see it impacting next-door neighbors as some other instances we've dealt with have. So I will be supportive of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is development permit application number DP 1138-609th Street. Mr. Holm, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a development permit. It's actually a renewal of a previously issued development permit that was issued originally in 2016, I believe. I've written it in the report, but I can't remember from memory. Oh, yeah, that is 2016. Thank you. Attachment B identifies the site. It's at the corner of 9th and Howard. And the development permit that's being renewed is for 47 townhouse-style units and composed of a duplex, triplex, and fourplex building form. The site plans, so there's the subject property. The site plan's on attachment D, if you don't mind pulling that up. The proposal is consistent with the Harewood Neighborhood Plan design guidelines, other relevant design guidelines that it's reviewed against, general design guidelines, environmentally sensitive area design guidelines, and the Parkway design guidelines as well. This proposal is targeting Tier 1 of the zoning bylaw Schedule D density bonusing provisions, which relates to protection of natural features, wood construction, use of recycled materials, and the retention of stormwater through a naturalized stormwater retention facility. So some site enhancements there that support a little bit of additional density, and this is consistent with the previous development permit approved in 2016, which included variances, some variances to building height and of up to 2 meters, and to perimeter wall height of 0.9 meters roughly, to allow the development to adjust to the grade of the site. And to respond to that, there's no concerns regarding the impacts of the proposed variances, as this is sort of a standalone site as well, no view implications there. Staff support the proposed variances and support the development permit as proposed.
Any questions for Mr. Holm before we hear from the delegations? Thank you very much. We have 2 delegations. Kenneth Bro, and you're going to tell me how I've mispronounced your name, and I'll be happy to hear it. Yes.
Yeah, or
Bro. And if you could introduce yourself at the mic and your address, please, and then proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. My name is Kenneth Brault. I'm a sitar player, and I also have a business called Straight Street Design, which keeps me busy. And I'm just basically here to answer any possible questions. I'm here also with the owner, Irene, who came from Vancouver, and we're just here to smooth out any bumps or answer any questions or anything like that.
Doesn't appear you're getting a very rough ride from this council.
I get off easy?
I think you got off in under 35 seconds.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Turley, pardon me. And then we'll get to Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Your Worship, to you, to Mr. Bro. I noticed in the, and this may be something that staff would answer, so I apologize if I'm asking the wrong question in regard to parking. I'm assuming that it's all within the the road that comes in with the turnaround? Is that,
That's correct, yeah.
okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
and the parking has actually been upgraded. That's one thing we had to do with the new bylaw. So, yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to move the recommendation.
We have one more.
Your worship, I believe she was just here to, in case
Glenn
there
Gatz
was...
is going to turn down the opportunity to address council. I'm shocked she'd turn down the stage, but I'm not unappreciative as we're getting close to 9. Seconded, Councillor Martman. Any discussion on the motion? Doesn't have to be read out, does it, Ms. Gurry? No? All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion are you opposed, Councillor? Councillor Brown is opposed. Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next is development permit application number DP 1160-145 Stewart Avenue. Mr. Holm.
All right. Thank you, Your Worship. So this is a property. It's located on Stewart Avenue between Bryden and Dawes. And that's shown on attachment B overhead here. This is a 15-unit multifamily development, and it's an existing Corridor 2 zoned property, and it's within the corridor designation in the OCP. And this is a 4-story building form that is contemporary design. And if you could bring up attachment F, if you don't mind, please, that would just to give an idea of the design of the building. The design incorporates structural frames in the corners to break up the building mass. It includes under-building parking, and as I mentioned, it's 4-story in form. It responds to the Newcastle and Brecon neighborhood plan design guidelines, and is proposing Tier 1 of the step code density bonusing provisions under the zoning bylaw, which relate to building energy efficiency achievements of 1 step beyond the required minimum step code under the building bylaw. If you wouldn't mind just bringing up the attachment F, I'm not sure if you can, there, just to kind of show what the building form looks like, that'd be great. Thanks. So the proposal does include variance to the maximum allowable amount of permitted small car parking. We're limited to, under the parking bylaw, 40% small cars. They're asking for 56%, so a higher ratio of small cars. And if you wouldn't mind just scrolling down a little bit there, the next, there we go. That shows from Stewart Avenue, the elevation from Stewart Avenue, or perspective there. The properties within the downtown mobility hub, and the proposal includes 2 electric vehicle charging stations, e-bike charging, and indoor and outdoor bike storage. So it does respond to different mobility options, and as well as different fuel choices for tenants there. So again, one variance to small car parking requirement, the ratio from 40% to 56%. Otherwise, the proposal is consistent with the development permit area guidelines, and staff support the development permit and proposed variance.
Councillor Brown. Unfortunately, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Through you to Mr. Holm. At the design panel, there was some conversation around more like secured parking in terms of from the elements and it being open, and also just the lighting impacts it would have on adjacent property, I believe, in particular to the south. It mentions it in the report, but I wasn't clear from the designs how it was actually addressed.
Okay, I'll try and respond. Sorry, Councillor Brown, through the chair. It was a little bit unclear, but I think you were speaking to concern at the design panel around the security of parking and lighting. That's what I heard. So,
correct, and how they impacted the neighboring parcel. I just wasn't clear how the design has changed to accommodate that.
in the garage was revised to avoid spillover into neighboring properties, so it'd be flush and recessed lighting. As well, they looked at, they did look at putting a door on the parkade as well, but the parkade is open on the sides, and the applicant is not proposing to fully enclose and secure the parkade. There is secure bicycle storage inside as well, but that's generally how they've, I'm not sure if that addressed your question entirely, Councillor Brown, but that's generally how the applicant responded to the panel.
Just to be clear, so they didn't address actually closing off the parking area.
They looked at it and decided not to do that. The building, the parking is open at the sides as well, and they figured that the door would be probably more of an annoyance to the neighbors than it would provide any security to the parking.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, I remember seeing email on this one from one of our members of the public. I'm guessing who was a neighbor who wanted the door in, not necessarily didn't want the door in. I'm wondering if we're creating a future problem with vandalism and that sort of thing by creating a place where people can get into from all four sides just by crawling through where there is no window. And having access to cars and stuff like that. Are we going to be hearing about this 2-3 years down the road? With people complaining about vandalism, breaking in cars, that sort of thing?
I mean, that's difficult to say with certainty that wouldn't happen, but the applicant, the developer, figures that they can manage that adequately with the design that they've proposed, and it's not, it wasn't as significant a concern to them as well, balancing the other interests and priorities in the project.
One other question I have then. Is this going to be a for sale condos, or is this an apartment building where people are renting?
My understanding is that it is rental, proposed as rental. That's my understanding. That, I believe, is part of the consideration there with regard to likely cost and other factors.
If it's a rental, then I'm okay, because then they can complain to the landlord, not us.
I was going to say, Councillor Bonner, yesterday as the Krogs were happily storing away their patio and lawn furniture with the assistance of our dear son-in-law and my lovely daughter, I thought to myself, it's probably been 25 years since a car has been inside our secure garage. So I'm with you on this one. People take their risks, and requiring a secure parking facility of a development would in fact increase the cost, which would have an impact in turn on the rents, and if it was condos, and in turn have an impact on the cost of the dwelling. So, people have to exercise, I think, reasonable care with their vehicles, and if too many vehicles get broken into, I suppose over time we will get rid of vehicles. So this might be working in favor of the cyclists. Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm also thinking about that particular neighborhood and some of the challenges they face, but I am satisfied with the conversation. I'm also satisfied with the question that Councillor Bonner asked. I have a bit of a random question, and that's, so we're giving them an increase in their floor area ratio by going up one step in the building code. What does that actually, I'm sure you don't have figures, but what are they gaining by increasing the floor area ratio? Is it hard to gain that extra step in the code, in the building code? Is it a net gain for us, or is it they're ticking a box and doing, putting something on their building and they get more floor area ratio because of it?
I don't have a number that I can respond with. Sorry, through your worship, to Councillor Hammond's question, but it is, I mean, it's not the only amenity that they're adding, but it is significant. It's going to get more challenging. Right now, we're early in the step code implementation stages. It's only become a requirement as of April this year. So they're going to have to achieve step 2 minimum, depending on when they build it. If they go ahead and build it, if they were building it now, they'd be step 2. In January, the step code increases, and then they're going to have to move beyond that as well. So it's going to get harder to achieve as we implement step code. That was the idea of partly how this amendment to Schedule D was, if you remember from last fall when it was brought in. It does advance as step code is advanced in the building bylaw. You have to achieve, again, a higher step in the step code to get the density bonusing under the zoning bylaw. And those higher steps are more expensive and achieve significantly higher building energy efficiency.
Okay, significantly higher energy.
As the step code advances.
Okay.
Yeah, early days now, but as we advance, it will achieve significantly higher energy efficiency towards ultimately net zero buildings. That's a ways off yet, but and we're not there yet. We have some work to do on that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not a question, just a comment. There is what I would refer to as a similar complex at 130 Vancouver Avenue, which is right behind there, and they too have unsecured parking underneath. And I'm sure if there was significant issues, we probably would have heard about it by now. So I'm not thinking it's a huge concern. So.
Thank you very much. Would someone care to make the motion? Moved by Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is Development Variance Permit Application Number DVP 407-3602 Overlook Drive. Mr. Holm.
Thank you, Your Worship. And this, again, the property is identified on Attachment B. We can bring that up overhead. That'd be great. Thank you. This is quite simply a relatively small proposed variance. There's the property on the corner of Overlook and Hammond Bay, and Piper's Park area. And yeah, this is a relatively small variance, front yard setback variance requested from 4.5 meters to 2.9 meters, and that's a variance of 1.6 meters. And it's for a covered patio that's proposed for the front yard. And the staff support the proposed variance, and notification has already taken place, so council can consider the proposed variance tonight should you wish to do so.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hemmons.
I'd like to move the recommendation, please.
Excellent. Seconded Councillor Bonner. Is there any discussion about this one? Everyone's read the material. All those in favor? Contrary? Councillor Brown, you're in favor? Yes. Thank you very much. So, Ms. Gurry, 9 o'clock. I'm in council's hands. So we just keep going. We need a motion to do so.
Your Worship, you can recess now and or keep carrying on. Neither one would require a motion, just a approximate time we would return. If we were
a motion to continue?
Your Worship, I think a 5-minute break, possibly. We have one councillor that just left regardless.
A 5-minute recess it is.
Our emergency routes, they are priority routes. They consist of roads that go to and from the hospitals, from the fire department stations, and from the BC ambulance stations. They're also their main commerce routes through the city of Nanaimo. So this allows commerce to happen during a snow event. So we hit those roads first. Once those are clear and open, then we move into the secondary roads, and then we move into the residential areas, which are dead-end roads and cul-de-sacs. And it can take up to 96 hours before we get into the residential areas. One of the side effects of plowing snow is it does end up on the sidewalk, and this can be very frustrating for homeowners and business owners that have just cleaned the sidewalk. It also pulls into their driveways. The crews try to keep it as close to the curb as they can, but we need to open the road right up to the curb to allow the drains to be exposed for when the snow starts to melt.
So this is one of our larger winter maintenance vehicles. They're very versatile in that they can be equipped with a lot of our different pieces of equipment. Right now this one has a front plow, a belly plow, as well as a salter or spreader box. We also have a brine unit that fits into this vehicle. This is the belly plow, and it's really good at removing hard-packed snow and ice. And then back up here to the front, we have what everyone is more familiar with. This front plow can push a lot of snow, so make sure that you slow down and keep your distance from the vehicles to ensure safety.
We have 17 vehicles that we use within the snow and ice operations for the city of Nanaimo. We also have an early shift that starts at 5 in the morning, and we have a night patrol, an afternoon shift, and an evening shift. They are eyes on the road, keeping us appraised of the conditions so that when the snow starts falling or ice starts forming on the roads, they can start salting and also call for other resources and mobilize the crews out.
This is one of the City of Nanaimo Public Works snow and ice control vehicles. And this is actually set up for a brining unit right now, or anti-icing. And what brine is a 23.3% sodium chloride solution. And it comes out of the spray bars down here at the bottom, and it's made here at the Public Works yard. It's a proactive method of snow and ice control, as when we know that there's a winter storm coming, we can actually lay this down on the road prior to the event.
By putting the brine down before the snow comes, it buys time. It lets us get on the roads, and then when we hit it with the plows, it doesn't stick. The snow doesn't stick, it comes off much easier. Whereas if we didn't brine, the snow has an opportunity to freeze to the road.
So another benefit of the brining or anti-icing unit is that during the frosty mornings, we can have it drive down the road, and then immediately the frost disappears as they're applying the brine.
Brine's a great tool for us. It's very cost effective. We can stretch our hard-pressed tax dollars to the maximum. We can make brine for cents on the dollar.
So the other thing that we ask is that everyone stays back from these anti-icing or any winter maintenance vehicles, as they have limited visibility and it's poor conditions out there, and they're trying to maneuver around everything. So just stay back and give them a little bit of room to operate and clear the roads.
So here we are in the Public Works yard, City of Nanaimo, and what you look around, you can see our various tools that we use for snow and ice fighting. We have tandem trucks, 4x4 trucks, we have backhoes. All our trucks are capable of having front plows on them, and the larger trucks we have belly plows on them as well, and they all have a salter sander that can be mounted on the back.
This is another tool in our winter maintenance fleet. It's a salting machine. And what happens is that the salt gets loaded into this hopper, and on this conveyor where it gets hit with these two saddle tanks, which are full of brine. Then it comes out here on the spreader. And why we add the brine is that it reduces the amount of spray from the salt, so it doesn't bounce nearly as far, saving about 20 to 30% of our salt. As well, by using the anti-icing liquid on the salt, the activation starts right as it hits the road.
The purpose of the salt is to keep the roads bare, keep ice from forming on the road. Again, safety for everyone, including ourselves and the public. That's why we put the salt down.
Today we're talking about clearing catch basins or road drains on residential roads. The first thing to understand is where the catch basin is in proximity to your residence. When clearing a catch basin or road drain, we want to make sure that you make yourself visible and aware of oncoming traffic. When clearing snow or debris from a catch basin, we ask that you put it in an area where it will not plug the catch basin again, not placing it on an already shoveled driveway or sidewalk. Sandbags are available at 2020 Labio Road 24/7. Just remember to make sure you bring a shovel. The City of Nanaimo and Public Works appreciate your help in keeping your catch basins clear. Thank you.
On snow days like this, the city of Nanaimo sends out a fleet of plows. How well equipped are these trucks?
They're really well equipped. We all have plows and sanders on them. We come with a belly plow too, so we're well prepared once we get a big snow like this. A lot of waves, a lot of friendly faces. People are pretty happy when you come and rescue them and clear off their road. So on our maps to determine where we go, we follow our red routes, which are our bus routes and our major routes, and they're first. Then our secondary routes are in purple, followed lastly by our side streets, which are in yellow. We try not to cover a nicely shoveled driveway, but sometimes we don't really have an option, and it's unfortunate. We're not trying to do it on purpose.
In some cases, the
Miss Councillor Bonner. Here we are. The next item is property disposition, 2230 Boxwood Road, 2221 and 2241 Bowen Road, Midtown Gateway Project. Mr. Lindsay, welcome back to the clean podium.
Thank you, Worship. As you mentioned, we're here this evening for Council's direction to proceed with disposition of property. And I think this story, Your Worship, I think Council's aware of it. We were in front of you in May of this year, where Council at your in-camera meeting authorized us to proceed with a letter of intent and complete negotiations on these properties, and return to Council when that's been done. So that work's been done. We're here to update Council, but maybe just for the benefit of for everyone else, just a little bit of history and a little bit of a story here. It actually starts 10 years ago when the city actually purchased the lands north of Northfield and west of Boxwood to facilitate the construction of the Midtown Gateway, so a new connection from Northfield through. And if we pull up attachment B, maybe that's a good place to start, if I can get that. Thanks, Derek. So this is an image showing, as I mentioned, those sort of lands north of Northfield, west of Bowen Road. It's hard to see maybe in this image, but the black outline is the lands that the city bought in 2010, and at that time just about 3.5 hectares of land for just over $2.2 million, and it was specifically to facilitate this new road connection, taking vehicles and traffic and pedestrians and connecting them up to Boxwood, through this Boxwood connector up ultimately to Bowen and a new access to Bevan Park. So that property purchase was made, and since that time, the city's proceeded with the planning work on this property, including there's been work done on the storm detention pond that's shown here on the plan, and there's preloading on the site today. If you go out, you'll see a large mound of dirt on the property that's actually getting ready for the future construction of that road. But as a result of this more detailed work, Your Worship, was ultimately determined that there was surplus lands now available. So generally that area below what's shown here is the Boxwood connector, that there was surplus city lands. So since that time, and with Council's direction, the city's done two things. We've worked with the church on Bowen Road to facilitate a land exchange. You can see on this parcel, just the way the road came out, we're going to have an odd-shaped piece of city land just on that sort of southwest corner of Bowen and Boxwood, which would be difficult to develop. And at the same time, the church had sort of an irregular shaped piece of property. So we've talked to them about doing a land exchange for those two pieces, and then consolidating our remaining lands with that newly acquired piece from the church and selling that to Island West Coast Development. So if we go to this next, thank you, if we go to the next slide. So the area in yellow shows the surplus land that the city's prepared to dispose of. The area in sort of that pinky purple color is the land that we acquire from the church. So the intent is to dispose of all of this property, Your Worship, and the estimated price is approximately $2.5 million for about what equates to about one hectare or approximately 2.5 acres of land that the city will be selling. So again, we purchased the property in 2010 for 2.2, about 3.5 acres. We're using the portions we need, and then now the remnant lands of about 1 hectare we're preparing to sell for approximately $2.5 million. Your Worship, certainly happy to take any more or any specific questions on this.
Before I go to Councillor Hemmons, Mr. Lindsay, I want to pay compliments to the previous council and the staff at the time who made this decision. Inflation has certainly been a factor. I appreciate that, but this is good public policy. This solves the problem at what I would argue is a very dangerous intersection where Rosstown comes into Bowen Road. It's created a wetland and rehabilitated some land, and it will allow for some appropriate development in that area. This is a very good news story, so thank you to everyone who's been involved. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to move the recommendation.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. Any discussion? Councillor Hemmons.
Maybe I may just, I will comment, not particular to this piece of bike ride with a retired engineer and a group of other folks actually to look at cycling infrastructure, and he rode us past this, and I'd never actually gone and had a close look at what we were doing, and he was really excited. He was kind of nerding out. I guess the city had done a presentation to the Engineering Association, and so he knew what was going where, and it was actually really exciting to see, so just that.
Thank you, Your Worship. The only part about that story I'd like to question is that a retired engineer would go for a bike ride, but
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Councillor Brown, in favor or opposed? In favor? Everyone in favor. Thank you very much. The next is checkout bag regulation bylaw. Late item, Mr. Sims. Welcome.
Right. Thank you, Worship. I can't let that one go, honestly. But I'm not surprised that a planner would throw mud at engineers and neglect their brilliant foresight that led to this project. Your Worship, we're pleased to be here. I've staff presentation for council, hopefully not too belabored. Mr. Dallaran and Ms. Ghislaine are here. This is a timely report. I'd be happy to let you know that this is Waste Reduction Week here in Canada. Your Worship declared as such, and one of 24 municipalities on the island, or pardon me, in British Columbia that declared that. So we've been here before. This is our, we've been stopped twice trying to get this bylaw off the ground, and hopefully this evening will get us there. So without any further ado, I'll introduce Mr. Dallaran and Ms. Ghislaine.
As they say in the game show, come on down. Good evening and welcome.
This is just fashion, it's the page. I know you're tired. Thank you, Mr. Sims. Good night, Your Worship and members of the City Council. I'm thankful for the work that was done by Mr. Sims and Mr. Thompson, the effort to bring this bylaw, as mentioned before, the Council. And I'm very happy to bring it back to the Council on the first day of the 2020 Waste Reduction Week. And I'm proud to serve the city of Nanaimo as one of the 24 local governments that signed the Waste Reduction Week proclamation with the Recycling Council of BC, and where waste reduction and environmental sustainability is a priority. Thank you. And before we begin our presentation, I would like to bring a typing error on the report to your attention. Under the discussion section on page 3, paragraph 2, report should state the draft bylaw goes beyond the scope of the proposed federal ban to also regulate the distribution of the biodegradable and compostable bags.
Perhaps,
And
Mr. Dallaran, you can tip the mic a little bit more towards you.
Sure, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Better? Okay. And discourage the dispense of new paper and reusable bags. That new word is missing from the report. And we have prepared a brief presentation for you, and I would like to ask my bright colleague, Ms. Kirsten Glenn, to walk us through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you. Hello, Your Worship. Hello, Council. I'm really excited to be here tonight, and I promise to make it brief. And thank you to Mr. Sims and Mr. Dallaran for the introduction, and as well, thank you for signing the proclamation for Waste Reduction Week. Oh yeah, just a plug. Check those social media posts, because they'll be coming. So I have two primary outcomes for today. The first will just be to provide a really brief outcome, a brief timeline of where we got to get to today, and then give context for the next steps. And as well, I will highlight the main outcomes of the bylaw, just to compare option 1 and option 2 in the report, and highlight how there is some overlap with the federal bylaw, the federal regulation, but our bylaw does go beyond that. So in December 2017, following a citizen delegation, Council moved that the City of Nanaimo wishes to ban the use of plastic bags. And then we got moving. So we did a public consultation, and we were set to bring forward the consultation analysis and drafting of the regulation. And then there was some movement on the provincial level, and the BC Court of Appeal ruled that single-use bylaws do require provincial approval. So we put it on hold. Then in January of this year, the Supreme Court of Canada affirmed that single-use bylaws require provincial approval. So we got moving again. We brought it to the Governance and Priorities Committee on March 9th, and it was set to be brought forward to Council, and then we declared a state of emergency. We put it on hold again. In September, however, we got the cue to get moving on it again from the province, who announced measures to better support municipal single-use bans and did approve 5 bylaws. So that was Richmond, Victoria, Saanich, Tofino, and Ucluelet. And as well, they mentioned that they will make changes to the community charter to better support bans to not require provincial approval moving forward. That was followed at the start of this month when the Government of Canada announced a plan to maintain their initially set timeline for the end of 2021 to ban harmful single-use plastics, including plastic bags. Now we're here today. So we are bringing it forward to Council with a recommendation for 3 readings and submission for provincial approval. And I will get into that in the next slide, but I'm just going to go over a couple more things. So should Council approve this recommendation, this is the anticipated timeline moving forward. So we will put in submission to the province. We'll do education campaign for awareness and reduction of single-use plastic checkout bags. It's an anticipated 3 to 6 month return from the minister. We do have to wait for the new government, the province, to be put in place. And then spring, summer, we would launch an education campaign on the regulation and prepare and assist retailers with the launch. And of course, the state of COVID at that time would give us indication as to what that education campaign would look like and how much of those COVID precautions we do need to bring into place. And then the anticipated date for approval is July 1st, 2021. And this gets to my second outcome of the presentation. I'm going to talk about why our bylaw still holds weight in lieu of the federal plastic bag regulation coming into force at the end of 2021. So that's them there. So our bylaw, not to be sold, provided to a customer. Also included in that plastic bag is compostable bags and biodegradable bags. As well, in our bylaw, we are to encourage reusable bags that are already owned and discourage the purchase of new paper bags. We do set a recycled content standard of 40% post-consumer recycled material, and as well set a fee for new reusable bags. We also identify exemptions. So this corresponds well with the waste reduction hierarchy and the zero waste hierarchy. We really want to encourage reusable bags to be kept in circulation. We don't want compostable bags, biodegradable bags, single-use plastic bags to be set out. And we want to discourage the purpose through a stepped fee for paper bags and new reusable bags so that it is discouraged for the purchase but not punitive to customers at retail stores to do so. And also within the reusable bag definition, we do declare that it should be washable and capable of at least 100 uses to ensure that, one, it's COVID safe, bringing it into the grocery store, and two, that it can be kept in use many, 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 many times.
Thank you very much. Councillor Armstrong.
I do have a concern about the compostable bags and biodegradable bags, because that's what we encourage to put into our garbage cans, like in that, yet we're saying that we can't, grocery stores can't sell them, yet that's what we want them to put their food waste into. So I think it's kind of contradictory, number one. And number two, does anybody else have that in their bylaws, or are we going to be subject to another court challenge because they are biodegradable?
No, so our bylaw corresponds with the other bylaws that have been approved, and including compostable bags and biodegradable bags with banned plastic bags. Part of the reason for this is that compostable bags are optional to be used as a liner within our green cart, but it is not necessarily a recommendation, more so an option. Paper bags, on the other hand, they can be put into both the recycling stream and into the compost stream, so there is the option. And would those compostable bags be to put into the environment, they would not necessarily break down. So they do break down in an industrial compost system, but they wouldn't break down in the environment. Biodegradable bags, on the other hand, they are not compatible with our organics stream. And there is definitely confusion between the two as far as inquiries from residents go.
So just as a follow-up, then have we let the business community know that? Because I noticed Quality Foods has now gone to those biodegradable or non-whatever, believing that they're going to be in compliance. So I'm just assuming we'll probably end up in a court challenge, but that's all right. Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I have a couple of questions. Number one, with regard to a couple of items that are not included in the exemptions. One is through my past history and past job. We use, and they still use, small plastic bags that enclose wet paper towel to keep the stem ends wet for flower bouquets. And these bags are about 4 inches long and or 8 inches long and 4 inches wide of clear plastic. They could use clear cello, but the problem with cello is it's easy to poke through them and the water would leak out. So I don't know if I had mentioned it previously when it came up before. And since then, I've seen another concern, and that is when you go to a lumber yard to buy a piece of lumber or several pieces that are longer than, sorry, I need to speak into the mic, longer than you can take in your vehicle without having a red flag on them. The Home Depot anyway uses a red plastic bag to staple on. Now, I don't know, there may be other alternatives they can use, but I don't know if that should be included or not.
What I can speak to is I know the exemptions here, they were based on other bylaws that have already been approved. And then as well, it was based on our consultation results. I cannot speak to the two items that you did bring up, however.
Okay, so somebody else going to speak to it? No? I do have another question when that's...
I would like to add that comment that federal ban is coming to place by end of next year. In general, they are looking to ban the bigger group of different type of plastics, and I believe that ban will cover some of the items that may not be in our bylaw at the moment.
Okay. The other question I have is with regard to item 4.3, where it says, notwithstanding section 3.2C and 3.3B, a business may provide a checkout bag free of charge if the business meets the other requirements of section 3.2. And I can't see in 3.2 where it gives them an opportunity to offer it free. And I'm probably just confused, but if you could go over that, that'd be great.
3.2.
If you look at item 4.3 on page, I don't know where it is on your agenda, but it's on page 23 of our agenda. And then it refers back to item 3.2. You're nearly there. So perhaps it's referring to a reusable bag.
At this point,
Want me to answer?
Yep, sure.
Your Worship, I believe this refers to recycling, like a returned bag. So if a client returns a bag to the business, that it can be reused again. And that allows for that possibility.
Okay,
And just to touch on Councillor Turley's other point, one of the exemptions includes for wrapping flowers or potted plants, so that can be part of the...
Yeah, except that we never used to use plastic. We would use laundry bags during cold weather to wrap them to
On the
protect them from
outside.
frost. But this is right at the stem ends, and it's a smaller bag.
Right.
So, I would not want to see some bylaw officer determining that, no, that's not, you can't use those, because that is fairly important to the industry, so.
Right, I understand the exemption would allow for that.
Okay, thank you.
any further questions?
I think we have a few. Councillor Thorpe?
Yes. Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, yes, I do have a couple of questions. First of all, thank you very much for your work on this. This is good news, and I'm pleased to see it proceeding. My two questions are, first of all, and this is my memory failing me, I'm very curious to recall the general feedback that you got from our business community when you consulted with them. You referenced that as being last March, just prior to COVID. And I do believe that we got a summary of that, but I simply cannot recall the highlights of it. So if it's possible to point me to that or to give a very brief summary, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
And I'll give you my second question as well, which I think Councillor Armstrong alluded to. My only concern with this, I think, or my main concern is going beyond the federal regulation. And I still am grappling with if a bag is compostable or biodegradable, why would we want to ban it? To me, that was the exercise, or the point of this whole exercise, to encourage people to use biodegradable products and compostable products, rather than simply banning something bad. We want them to use something better. So if something is compostable or biodegradable, and excuse my simplicity, I still don't quite get why we're not wanting them to use those products. And I recognize there's contamination in the organic stream, and maybe that's the answer, but is that the only answer, or is there something I'm missing here?
Okay. To your worship, to answer the second part of the question, the biodegradable and the challenge the industry faces, especially non-industrial compostable facilities, that these material takes a long period to be really biodegraded. And the other part is that we are trying to encourage reuse, and that's, I think, as a team. We're trying to encourage using the materials for many times, as it's been mentioned, using of the reusable bags, which they last 100 times more. Considering the pollution is created and the energy is consumed to produce these type of biodegradable bags, the pollution is created for production, and then it's energy used to biodegrade them. It just creates more pollution, and that's what we're trying to avoid. And also the confusion is in the market right now is another challenge we are facing. Some of these materials are not completely certified. There is a process that we hopefully reach to that by hopefully a couple of years or maybe more, to be able properly take them to the composting processing within our available composting process available to the municipality like us. But again, the main notion is just to avoid use of single items and focus more on reusing.
All right, thank you, and I appreciate that, and I don't disagree with that. And I think, though maybe this goes back to my first question, where we have some businesses in town who are thinking that they're doing a good thing by moving to a compostable bag, and I realize there's degrees of biodegradability, if that's a word, and some are better and some are worse than others. But businesses, what I'm trying to say is some businesses have tried to do the right thing and move in the right direction, and now we're telling them, no, sorry, that's not good enough and that's not acceptable. So again, I reference back to my first question about the feedback you received from the business community. I'd be interested if you could just give a brief summary of that, especially with regard to that point.
Overall, the consultation was done in 2019. The common themes was strong support among both residents and retailers to ban single-use bags as a regulatory tool. The retailers and residents are already choosing not to use single-use plastics. It's already happening. And education through a variant of channels is critical to the success of the new regulation. And that's why, as we mentioned, we are going to have 2 sets of the new education campaigns that's moving forward. And also general consensus on list of exemptions, particularly high support for meat, frozen food wrapping, and for transporting live fish. And also paper bags with minimum recycled content level should be allowed to be provided for minimum of 25 cents each for fee. These were the common themes coming from business consultation that was taking place in 2019. As it was mentioned, there was a strong support among businesses and residents.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is regarding the July 1st, when we're bringing this forward. When we first went down this road, the companies that usually supply these products jumped on board right away, at least the grocery stores did, and started charging for bags right off the bat, including plastic bags. And so I think everybody's quite familiar and knows it's coming. I'm wondering if we could, does that date of July 1st, why is it so late in the year, and why could we not do that quicker? In reference to Councillor Turley's comments about the Home Depot or the red flags, I reuse those all the time. They're sticking in my truck door right now, so those can be reused. Yeah, yeah. But the other thing, also in terms of biodegradable, biodegradable isn't like a paper bag. Like you can bury your paper bag in your backyard and 4 months later it'll be gone. Biodegradable just means it keeps breaking down, but it actually never really goes away. It just gets smaller and smaller. So that's probably why they don't recommend using those. And even compostable bags aren't really compostable, not like paper bag. That's my understanding. Mm-hmm. Fake news, yes. So the question, can we bring it forward quicker?
Considering that we are going to an election, by the time the new Minister of Environment possibly is sitting in place and then they start the process, we were told it takes probably up to 6 months. Then probably takes us to somewhere in mid-spring. And then that gives us enough time to make sure we get it back, bring it back to the council for final reading and implement that date. But also on the other side, the way that COVID and pandemic just in unfolding, it seems that as we go to the warmer season, we will have less challenge with the pandemic, and also we probably have more understanding of how it may impact this bylaw, and we still have some time if we want to make any changes or amendment to the bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to add to that bylaw, we can't make it retroactive, so the date is either the date of adoption by council, which would come after ministerial approval, and that will be close to the July 1st date anyways. And should we not have ministerial approval by that time, we would have to amend the bylaw to reflect that, because it can't be retroactive.
Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
I was just hoping to move the recommendation.
Your Worship, the bylaw needs to be read out.
Has to be, yes. Go ahead, Councillor Gesselbrock.
Okay. So is this the whereas?
Motion that checkout bag regulation bylaw
Gotcha.
number.
Move that checkout bag regulation bylaw 2020 number 7283 to regulate single-use checkout bags pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
That checkout bag regulation bylaw 2020 number 7283 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion?
Yep.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to staff again, I thought I read somewhere in here, and I can't find it because I didn't highlight it, that businesses that have an inventory of bags within these particular banned products have time to get rid of them. Is that?
Through Your Worship, I can speak from my experience from City of Victoria that they usually keep an inventory up to 2 or 3 months within the retailers. And then by passing this, we are going to start this communication, and we have already had conversation with Chamber of Commerce, which we're going to follow up on that. And it gives them enough time to be able to plan ahead, to not order any more than what they need before this
stock of them,
bylaw coming to enforcement.
If they have a stock of them, they're not going to get fined tomorrow.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock?
I just wanted to say thank you for the work that staff has put into this. This has been quite a process, moving this bylaw through, and it's gone through many hands and through many different conditions. And I think ultimately it's an important move forward. And, you know, it's single-use checkout bags is one item, but I think there's a strong call for us to reorganize how we're using our material world, and it's very clear that the circular economy is something that we are moving forwards, and we can see at the provincial and federal level that that is going. And when we look at the complexity of how many different materials are out there, it really is going to require a lot of communication to the community and constant changes to our regulation and processes. And so I'm really thankful for the knowledge and expertise of the staff at See Here. I think we've got a good team together, and I really look forward continuing moving forward the zero waste process. So thank you so much, and I look forward to this passing.
Thank you very much. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Councillor Gesselbrock?
I'd move that checkout bag regulation bylaw 2020 number 7283 pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you.
That in accordance with Section 9 of the Community Charter, direct staff to forward checkout bag regulation 2020 number 7283 to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy for approval.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you to staff.
Thank you so much, and I think I should congratulate all of you. Appreciate it.
So we've made some progress on an environmental issue.
Certainly. Yes, certainly.
They do that in Nicaragua, actually.
The next are bylaws. Zoning Amendment Bylaw 2020 number 4500.167.
Zoning Amendment Bylaw 2020 number 4500.167 to rezone 3841 and 3817 Victoria Avenue and 3896, 3874, 3852, 3848, and 3816 Island Highway North from single dwelling residential R1 to community corridor Core 3 be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is Property Tax Exemption Bylaw 2020 number 7315. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I move that Property Tax Exemption Bylaw 2020 number 7315 to provide exemption from 2021 property taxes be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The bylaw status sheet is for information only. And we're on to notices of motion. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to move that Council direct staff to prepare a report within 30 days outlining options to provide free menstrual products in city facilities in the spring of 2021, including a list of city facilities and the cost and feasibility to provide barrier-free menstrual product distribution at each location, and outline how the lessons learned from the pilot projects undertaken by the cities of Coquitlam, Port Moody, and Victoria in their civic facilities can benefit a similar program in Nanaimo, and evaluate partnership opportunities such as with United Way's Period Promise campaign, and provide future recommendations to Council as part of ongoing program sustainment.
Thank you very much. Councillor Armstrong, you're up with the notice of motion re-residential street parking.
The Council directs staff to prepare a report outlining options for Council to consider in order to permit residents to park on residential streets for more than 24 hours without having to move their vehicles.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Armstrong again, a notice of motion re city facilities room bookings for non-profit addiction support groups.
That staff prepare a report for options to secure use of rooms at City of Nanaimo facilities to assist nonprofit addiction support group meetings, which are a critical part of their recovery program.
Thank you very much. We have one item of correspondence respecting the Vancouver Island and Coastal Community Climate Leadership Plan Resilience Summit, November 6th. And if I hear nothing further, it's received for correspondence purposes. We have a motion to adjourn. Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Armstrong. Thank you very much, everyone. I do appreciate it. Thank you, staff.